I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics. Messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for August the 29th, 2025. Today, because we are ending the work week, we have a rather long teaching in anticipation of the weekend, because we definitely know that there are many of you who get caught up on back episodes of Messianic Insider during the weekend. So that's why we have a slightly longer but very important teaching. Let's start out our theology roundup. Our teaching is taken from our ministry commentary, Colossians and Philemon for the Practical Messianic, which is available in both paperback as well as ebook for Amazon Kindle. And specifically, we're going to be discussing Colossians 1:15 through 20, which plays a direct role in Bible readers, men and women of faith, understanding the nature of the Messiah. It's frequently believed that the Apostle Paul was issuing not only a hymn, perhaps used by the early believers to exalt Yeshua the Messiah, but he was also subverting the false teaching which had errantly influenced those in Colossae, which held Yeshua to be a highly exalted being, an entity, perhaps like the figure of wisdom, which is seen in both the Tanakh as well as Second Temple Jewish literature. But nevertheless, wisdom was a created entity. And so some of the terms, some of the expressions which appear in Colossians 1:15 through 20 subvert that. And so that's why this is a very important teaching. We got to sort through a lot of information, some of which you are unfamiliar with, but this will make sense, I hope, why a term like firstborn is used to describe Yeshua, why certain statements are made regarding Yeshua, which can seem out of place for a lot of 20th and 21st century Bible readers, but for those in Second Temple Judaism would have had a much better handle on it. All right, so there we go. Let's switch windows to our discussion. We're going to start out with, Colossians 1:15 through 17. And when you see in different commentaries this thing called MARV listed, that stands for Messianic Apologetics Revised Version. That's simply my modifications to the public domain World Messianic Bible, which was formerly called the Hebrew Names Version. So you are permitted to make derivative products from this. Okay, so Colossians 1:15 through 17. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, in heaven and upon the earth, things visible and things invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things are held together. All right, Colossians 1:15 through 20. This is kind of an overview of what we're going to have to sort through here. This section of Colossians likely formed an early hymn or poem present in the ancient Messianic community, used to exclaim the supremacy of Yeshua the Messiah over the cosmos. Even if this was not a hymn, Paul was still expressing some significant thoughts about Yeshua. This is probably the most important part of the entire epistle due to its Christological claims. Christology simply means the study of the Messiah, or the study of the nature of the Messiah, which would be specifically important for understanding the angle of the philosophy later referred to, Colossians 2:8, something which errantly influenced the Colossians. Parallels can be seen between Colossians 1, 15 through 20, and additional statements which would be made in Colossians chapter 2. All right, so here we have a chart entitled Paul's Parallel Arguments. In the left-hand column, Colossians 1, 15 through 20, and the right-hand column, Colossians 2. So let's just briefly go through this and see some of the paralleling statements which are made. For by him all things were created, in the heavens and on the earth, visible things and invisible things, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things have been created through him and for him. Colossians 1:6, World Messianic Bible. Who is the head of all principality and power? Colossians 2:10b, World Messianic Bible. He is the head of the body, the assembly. Colossians 1:18a, World Messianic Bible. And not holding firmly to the head. Colossians 2:19, World Messianic Bible. For all the fullness was pleased to dwell in him. Colossians 1:19, World Messianic Bible. For in him all the fullness of the deity dwells bodily. Colossians 2:9, World Messianic Bible. Finally, and through him to reconcile all things to himself by him, whether things on the earth or things in the heavens, having made peace through the blood of his cross. Colossians 1:20, World Messianic Bible. Having stripped the principalities and the powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. Colossians 2:15, World Messianic Bible. All right. When reviewing the hymn of Colossians 1, 15 through 20, it is possible that its claims were derived from theological sentiments seen in first century Judaism as well as diaspora Hellenistic Judaism, where Proverbs 8, Genesis 1, and wisdom of God beliefs were in some kind of view. The language of Colossians 1, 15 through 20 is notably dissimilar from Paul, which indicates how he was probably quoting something, in this case, to most likely refute how the false teachers of Colossae had been devaluing Yeshua the Messiah. Douglas J. Moo concludes that, quote, Paul has quoted and redacted an earlier hymn, unquote, adapting it for his purposes in the letter. For Larry W. Hurtado, author of Lord Jesus Christ, Devotion to Jesus in Earliest Christianity, quote, it is likely that the hymn either originated within the context of early Christian praise and worship as a hymn celebrating Jesus, or was composed by the author of Colossians himself as an expression of Christ's supremacy, unquote. Why would Colossians 1, 15 through 20 serve to be the most important part of the epistle to the Colossians? It is not that difficult to see, because in these verses, readers see Yeshua the Messiah uplifted as the, and here we have 7 different things. Number 1, the image of God, Colossians 1:15. Number 2, firstborn, Colossians 1:15. Creator, Colossians 1:16. Number 4, head of the ecclesia, Colossians 1:18. Number 5, firstborn from the dead, Colossians 1:18. Number 6, fullness of God, Colossians 1:19. Number 7, reconciler of all things, Colossians 1:20. How one interprets the claims which are made in Colossians 1:15 through 20 will significantly affect one's Christology. Most of today's evangelical Protestants and Messianic people concur that this hymn reflects a high view of a divine Messiah who would be incarnated as a human. The hymn was specifically employed by Paul to refute whatever false teaching or teachings had circulated in Colossae, something which undoubtedly subtracted from the supremacy of Yeshua and his work. It is not unlikely that the various terms used by the false teachers to denigrate Yeshua were subverted by Paul to highlight and exalt Yeshua being overturned. This hymn contains unique words and a unique message which are targeted to both non-Jewish pagan and Jewish non-believers, representing philosophies which could have errantly influenced the Colossians. This does require modern lay readers who often approach the text with no historical framework for the statements made to expel some effort to follow what is said a bit more carefully. N.T. Wright indicates how Colossians 1, 15 through 20, quote, is a typical statement of Jewish-style monotheism and would be a telling rejoinder to any dualistic theology which saw creation as inherently bad, unquote. But where a statement would be expected to be made of the Lord, the God of Israel, Wright further states how it, quote, is now said in reference to Jesus Christ. He has not displaced the God of Abraham, the God of the Exodus. He has made him known. If the hymn stands within mainline Judaism over against paganism, it also stands over against Judaism itself, unquote. From this vantage point, then, what is seen in Colossians 1, 15 through 20 would be similar to what Paul does to the Shema in 1 Corinthians 8, 1 through 6. There, he took the confession, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, Deuteronomy 6:4, and filled it in with content which spoke about Yeshua. For there is but one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and we exist for him, and one Lord, Yeshua the Messiah, by whom are all things, and we exist through him. 1 Corinthians 8:6, New American Standard. The Apostle Paul was found here working within first century Jewish monotheism, but was redefining it in light of the identity of Yeshua. Most significant to consider for the message of the hymn is the role of the Jewish wisdom tradition, especially as Paul had previously labeled Yeshua as the wisdom of God, 1 Corinthians 1:24. Some of the titles and descriptions given to Yeshua in Colossians 1, 15 through 20 were also given to the figure of wisdom, evidenced in the Tanakh, Apocrypha, and Philo. They included number 1, image of God, Wisdom 7:26, Philo, allegorical interpretation 1:43. Number 2, firstborn, Philo, questions and answers on Genesis 4:97. Number 3, agent of creation, Proverbs 8:22-36, 3:19, Philo on flight and finding 109. And number 4, beginning, Proverbs 8:23, Wisdom 6:22. The most significant comparison one has to consider is how wisdom was referred to as both image and beginning, claims which were made of Yeshua the Messiah as well. Colossians 1:15, 18, as is seen in the works of Philo. And God planted a paradise in Eden, in the east, and there he placed the man whom he had formed, Genesis 2:8. For he called that divine and heavenly wisdom by many names, and he made it manifest that it had many appellations, for he called it the beginning and the image and the sight of God. Allegorical interpretation 1:43. Now the image of God is the word by which all the world was made. Special Laws 181. When one considers how Yeshua the Messiah was specifically called the image and beginning, what was being asserted here by the hymn? Generally speaking, in theological studies today, those who hold to a low Christology will conclude that the author of Colossians widely associated the Messiah as being God's wisdom, a quasi-personal emanation of God's mind or thoughts. From this angle, Yeshua would be the most important mediator between the Father and humanity. Perhaps the Messiah might even be supernatural, but should not be considered fully divine as part of the Godhead. In all probability, Yeshua was a created entity, even if he was the first created being ever in the cosmic program. As wisdom says in Sirach 24:9, from eternity in the beginning, God created me. Revised Standard Version. For a theologian like James D.G. Dunn, wisdom was a way, quote, of speaking of God's own outreach to and interaction with his world and his people, a manner of speaking of God's immanence while safeguarding his transcendence, in a word, personifications of God's wisdom rather than intermediaries, unquote. It is difficult to avoid the fact that the hymn of Colossians 1:15-20 does parallel some of the descriptions seen of wisdom. Proverbs 8:22 and 23 notably says, the Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way before his works of old. From everlasting I was established from the beginning, from the earliest times of the earth. Proverbs 8:22 and 23, New American Standard. This depicts a force from God existing before the world of humanity. Yet, to what degree should Yeshua the Messiah be associated with wisdom? How far one pushes the wisdom motif is an ongoing debate between theological conservatives and liberals, with conservatives arguing that echoes of wisdom are in view, but that Yeshua is the one who is far superior. Yeshua possesses some of the same qualities as wisdom, but when the descriptions of wisdom are fully tallied together, Yeshua is testified to do things which wisdom has not done and cannot do. Andrew T. Lincoln thinks, quote, at this early stage of Christological reflection, no problem would have been contemplated in holding that, like wisdom as God eminent in creation, Christ was both sovereign and first within creation as the divine agent of creation, unquote. Yet, it is not what Yeshua and wisdom have in common, which is important to notice in Colossians 1:15-20. It is what classifies Yeshua as different, which is important to notice. While Yeshua might be thought of as God's wisdom, he is much, much more. The major and significant difference between wisdom and Yeshua the Messiah is how wisdom was just an intangible, created force of God which emerges in history. Wisdom was not a personal being who is supreme over the cosmos, has created the cosmos, has brought final redemption to humanity, and actually desires a personal relationship with men and women. Ben Witherington III asserts how, quote, the element of personal preexistence in this hymn goes beyond the personification of wisdom in the Jewish sapiental material. The first stanza is about a person, not merely the power God exhibited in creation. For that power was exercised in person by the Son, whereas wisdom is seen as bringing God's people together in Sirach. Christ is given this role in the Christology of Colossians and Ephesians, unquote. Considering whether or not Yeshua is just God's wisdom or whether he goes beyond wisdom will determine whether or not the hymn of Colossians 1:15-20 reflects a high Christological view of the Messiah or not. Okay, so Colossians 1:15a. The opening of the hymn excuse me, asserts how Yeshua the Messiah is the image of the invisible God. Colossians 1:15a, Tree of Life version. Yeshua as the image of God is a concept seen elsewhere in the apostolic scriptures, specifically as he reflects the Father's glory. 2 Corinthians 4:4, Hebrews 1:3. It is also difficult to avoid that some kind of connection is made between Yeshua as God's image and the creation of humans in God's image. Genesis 1:26 and 27. How far can one push some of this? And could a low Christology of Yeshua being an exalted human really be in view? This would be a very difficult conclusion to draw because a very specific description was used in the hymn. Ekon tu theou tu aoratu, not the image of God, but instead the image of the invisible God. In the Septuagint rendering of Genesis 1:27, human beings were only made in the ekona theou. I'm going to have to clean my glasses off later. Similarly, wisdom was only said to be an image of his goodness. Wisdom 7:26, Revised Standard Version. Ekon tes agathotetos autou. And the image and the sight of God. Philo Allegorical Interpretation 143. Ekana kai horasin theou. Yeshua the Messiah, in stark contrast, represents something which cannot be seen or is invisible. The adjective aoratos means unseen, not to be seen, invisible, from the Liddell Scott lexicon. Paul would later detail how such invisibility was a quality only God himself possesses. Now to the King, eternal, immortal, invisible, aoratos, the only God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. 1 Timothy 1:17, New American Standard. The invisible attributes were considered by Paul to be his eternal power and divine nature. Romans 1:20, New American Standard. If Yeshua is the image of the invisible God, not just the image of God, what specific things would such invisibility then relate to? Having taken on human flesh, what would the Messiah be able to reflect of his Father to the world of mortals? Ezekiel 1:26 provides some important clues to seriously consider. Now, above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, like lapis lazuli in appearance, and on that which resembled a throne, high up, was a figure with the appearance of a man. Ezekiel 1:26, New American Standard. F. Bruce concludes, quote, to say that Christ is the image of God is to say that in him the nature and being of God have been perfectly revealed, that in him the visible has become visible, unquote. So, in asserting that Yeshua is the image of the invisible God, Colossians 1:15a, the hymn made a claim about Yeshua which goes beyond human beings made in only God's image, and likewise wisdom being a force made in God's image. It can certainly be suggested that several of the most significant theophanies in the Tanakh, Old Testament, involved pre-incarnate manifestations of Messiah Yeshua, as such an image of the invisible God. The author of Hebrews spoke of how Moses persevered because he saw him who is invisible. Hebrews 11:27, New International Version, a reference to the burning bush, which was notably preceded by a statement about his service for the Messiah. Hebrews 11:26. Yeshua being the image of the invisible God should be taken as proof of his pre-existence. Yeshua being the image of the invisible God highlights his unique identity, not only with the Father, but also in redemptive history. One should be able to see that with Yeshua asserted to be the image of the invisible God, contrary to any other, how claims of the hymn continue to build, clarifying any misunderstandings the ancient Colossians would have had. Yet, why refer to Yeshua as God's image at all, even if it is an invisible image which only he possesses? Consider our Lord's words in John 14:9. Have I been so long with you, and yet you have not come to know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. Yeshua has just been called his beloved Son, John 1:13. When believers see Yeshua as the image of the invisible God, while it is absolutely true that they see his great power and authority present as God incarnate in human flesh, we also see the exact representation of his nature. Hebrews 1:3, New American Standard, something which extends to God's great love and compassion. Yeshua, as the image of the invisible God, does represent all of the fullness of God, but he also represents a fullness which believers should be trying to reach as they mature in faith. Ephesians 3:19, 4:13. Human beings, while only being the image of God and not the image of the invisible God, should reflect enough of their Creator's basic character. For humans, being God's icon still regards that which represents something else in terms of basic form and features. From the BDAG lexicon. Yeshua's association as God's image is something far closer than any of us can comprehend, even closer than wisdom. John 1:18 detailed how no one has seen God at any time, the only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. New American Standard. Yeshua reflected in the world of mortals who the Father is. If Paul had been confronting any kind of errant philosophical or proto-Gnostic errors present in Colossae, where anything physical was considered to be evil, then the Messiah portrayed as Akon would easily refute this. Yeshua the Messiah is the physical representation of his Father, incarnated in the flesh, Colossians 1:22. The Messiah, only being God, can reduce the importance of his redeeming work for fallen humanity. And the Messiah, only being human, can likewise reduce the gravity of his redeeming work and what it has taken to reconcile men and women to the Father. Psalm 49:7-15. In Yeshua being God's Akon, the redeemed in him can truly see who the Father is, but believers can also see what someone can be without the presence of human sin. Those who hold to a low Christology of Yeshua the Messiah only being God's wisdom would not make the close observations about him actually being the image of the invisible God. There is a noticeable trend in some liberal theology to be over-conciliatory to the Jewish theological tradition, which views the Messiah as only being human or possibly some supernatural agent empowered by God. Sadly enough, this view can be very tempting to some of today's Messianic people as well, even at the expense of key biblical doctrines. Against such a tide, though, Wright asserts, quote, "It is only in Jesus Christ that we understand what divinity and humanity really mean. Without him, we lapse into sub-Christian or even pagan categories of thought, and then wonder why the doctrine of incarnation causes us so much difficulty. Paul's way of expressing the doctrine is to say, poetically, that the man Jesus fulfills the purposes which God had marked out both for himself and for humanity," unquote. Far be it from Yeshua the Messiah just being another version of the Force wisdom. The Apostle Paul was clear in his teachings to specify how you are in Messiah Yeshua, who became to us wisdom from God and righteousness and sanctification and redemption. 1 Corinthians 1:30, New American Standard. To Bruce, this means that, quote, Christ was the personal, not personified, and incarnate wisdom of God, unquote. Peter T. O'Brien appropriately details how in diaspora Jewish theology, the figure of wisdom was, quote, a quasi-personal way to speak of a power of God, whereas in contrast, the one spoken of in our paragraph in Colossians is the living person, Jesus Christ, whom Paul had met face to face on the Damascus Road, unquote. Yeshua the Messiah certainly does represent God's wisdom, but he is more than just an intangible force witnessed throughout history. Yeshua the Messiah goes beyond wisdom and provides redemption for humanity, something which the Hellenistic Jewish idea of wisdom did not do, demonstrating a personal interest in people, just as Paul had first encountered the Lord. Colossians 1:15b. In the same opening line of the hymn, Yeshua the Messiah is exclaimed as the firstborn of all creation. Colossians 1:15b, Tree of Life version. Some Bible readers, not knowing where this description originates, may immediately draw an assumption that Yeshua being firstborn means that Yeshua was a created being or entity. But this is not at all what was being communicated. The designation of Yeshua as prototokos, pases ketaseos, did not relate to a status of possession, as though the creation or earth were to own him as only being human, but instead related to a status of preeminence. It has been noted how the term prototokos is different from protoktisis, which would mean first created. The designation prototokos pases kitaseos is best understood to mean firstborn before all creation, New International Commentary, New Testament, or firstborn over all creation, New International Version. Further consistent with before all things, Colossians 1:17. In the estimation of Daniel B. Wallace, the clause prototokos pases kitaseos is a genitive, that's the Greek case indicating possession. It is a genitive clause of subordination, which would regard Yeshua's status as the firstborn over all creation. Greek grammar beyond the basics. Anyone familiar with the Tanakh or Old Testament should immediately note how the title firstborn, the Hebrew Bekor, is one of high preeminent status. It is applied to people regardless of where or when they were born, sometimes even if they were actually not the first chronologically born in their family line. Firstborn describes Reuben, the son of Jacob, Genesis 49:3 and 4. The people of Israel is God's son, Exodus 4:22. King David, Psalm 89:27, and the northern kingdom of Israel or Ephraim, Jeremiah 31:9. The title firstborn, possessing royal distinction, is appropriate for the King of Kings and his ultimate authority. Revelation 1:17 and 18. As it was said of King David, I will make him the firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. Psalm 89:27, Revised Standard Version. Similarly, Yeshua being firstborn of creation and him actually being the creator of it all, Colossians 1:16b, by necessity draws prototokos pases kitaseos to be firstborn over all creation. New International Version. The one who is the preeminent over everything, Yeshua being the heir of all things. Hebrews 1:2, New American Standard. The New English Bible, paraphrases prototokos passes kitiseos as his is the supremacy over all created things. Its translators are not at all trying to imply that Yeshua the Messiah is a created being, but are trying to convey in more contemporary language the dynamics of his kingship. This rendering, however, can confuse some people who will often not take the time to read the text of the hymn a little closer and consider the claims it has made. The assertion that Yeshua is a created being and not God incarnate can only be made if firstborn is divorced from its wider biblical context. Romans 8:29, Hebrews 1:6, Revelation 1:5. When readers see Yeshua as the agent of creation, firstborn meaning supreme is best understood as when all things began, the Word already was. John 1:1, New English Bible. Furthermore, it is witnessed how Yeshua, being firstborn, merited his being worshipped, something which would be idolatrous if he were not God. Hebrews 1:6, also Psalm 97:7. Even though ancient Jewish literature from the first century period did portray various pre-existent figures or forces used by God, they did not possess all of the qualities which the apostolic scriptures portray Yeshua the Messiah as exercising. While connections can be seen between Yeshua the Messiah and the figure of wisdom, there should be no question that in comparison, Yeshua is the one who is unique. In his refutation of the Arians, who believed that Yeshua was just a created being, Colossians 1:15 and 16 was pointed out by the 4th century theologian Athanasius as being of considerable importance. But the word firstborn has again the creation as a reason in connection with it, which Paul proceeds to say, for in him all things were created. But if all the creatures were created in him, he is other than the creatures, and is not a creature, but the creator of the creatures. Orations against the Arians 2:62. Robert M. Bowman Jr. and J. Ed Komaszewski properly add how, quote, the logic of Paul's reasoning from verse 15 to verse 16, the Son is the firstborn of all creation because everything was created in, through, and for him, really requires that in this context, the Son to be distinguished from all creation. In any case, then, Colossians 1:15 does not teach that the Son was the first creature whom God made, unquote, putting Jesus in his place. Their book, excellent resource for you to add to your library. The title firstborn is one of great status and rulership. If a reader can understand that firstborn equals anointed king in Colossians 1:15, it becomes obvious that Yeshua is not a created being. It is perfectly legitimate to treat prototokos passes kitiseos as a genitive clause of subordination. The firstborn over all creation. New International Version, Holman Christian Standard Bible, today's New International Version. Colossians 1:16. After designating Yeshua as both image and firstborn, the hymn makes the claim, for in him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. Colossians 1:16, Revised Standard Version. Excuse me. These are very broad sweeping categories encompassing the whole of creation, which to some degree are affected in auto or in him. The role which wisdom played in God creating the universe needs to be considered here. As Proverbs 3:19 says, the Lord by wisdom, b'chokmah, founded the earth, by understanding he established the heavens. New American Standard. Proverbs 8:22-36 depicts wisdom as a pre-existent force of God able to carry out his bidding. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, before his works of old. From everlasting I was established, from the beginning, from the earliest times of the earth. When there were, no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills I was brought forth, while he had not yet made the earth and the fields, nor the first dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he inscribed a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when the springs of the deep became fixed, when he set for the sea its boundary so that the water would not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundation, of the earth, then I was beside him as a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in the world, his earth, and having my delight in the sons of men. Now, therefore, O sons, listen to me, for blessed are they who keep my ways. Heed instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at my doorposts. For he who finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord, but he who sins against me injures himself. All those who hate me love death. Proverbs 8:22-36, New American Standard. Philo actually depicted God as the father of humanity and wisdom as the mother, further claiming that it was wisdom, by means of whom de haes the universe arrived at creation. On Flight and Finding 109. It is difficult to argue against echoes of wisdom being present in Colossians 1:15 and 16. And those who hold to a low Christology often simply assume that Yeshua the Messiah was a created being or force of God, not at all dissimilar from wisdom, if not actually being wisdom. Yet again, while there are similarities to be seen between Yeshua the Messiah and wisdom, are there any significant dissimilarities? Lincoln correctly notes how, quote, Colossians 1:16 goes further in its Christological reflection, so that here Christ can be said to be the goal of creation also. This addition of to him or for him also goes beyond what is said of wisdom, as it adds to the conceptuality of the wisdom tradition, unquote. The activity of God the Father working through the Son is evidenced hauti and auto, for in him, New American Standard. Yeshua is to be considered the firstborn of all creation, Colossians 1:15, New American Standard, because of the specific reason, because in him all things created, Young's literal translation. The reason Yeshua is to be considered the firstborn is because he made the universe. Dunn, who perhaps relies more heavily on the wisdom tradition than he ought, is still forced to conclude, quote, that firstborn must denote primacy over creation and not just within creation, is indicated by the conjunction linking the two verses, unquote. Making note of the construction between Colossians 1:15 and 16. Prototokos, pases, kitiseos, hauti, and auto ektiste. The hymn claims that all things have been created through him, New American Standard, de autu, similar to God's use of wisdom in Philo. But wisdom in Philo was only a force which assisted God in creating the universe. Contrary to this, Yeshua's creation extends ta panta en tois oranois kai epites geis ta horata kai ta aorata, meaning that it is multi-dimensional. This includes all things created, those in the heavens, and those upon the earth, those visible and those invisible. Colossians 1:16, Young's literal translation. We may need to each be reminded of how God, and not only the Father, but also the Son, being involved in the creation of the universe is something clearly implied by Proverbs 30, verse 4. Who has ascended into heaven and descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Who has wrapped the waters in his garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name or his son's name? Surely you know. Proverbs 30, verse 4, New American Standard. Even more specifically than this, Yeshua is stated to be creator of thrones, dominions, rulers, and authorities. Yeshua is supreme, especially over angels, a concept which will be important for Paul to stress, as many of the Colossians had succumbed to angel worship. Colossians 2:18. A reference to these various authorities can certainly be found in the literature of the pseudepigrapha. Testament of Levi 3:8 refers to how in heaven there with God are thrones and authorities. Similarly, in 1 Enoch 61:10 are depicted all the forces of the heavens, the cherubim, seraphim, and ophanim, cherubim, seraphim, ophanim, and all the angels of governance and the other forces on earth and over the water. Just as Yeshua exercises creative power over these authorities, some of them could probably also be associated with the elemental forces of Colossians 2:8. The Apostle Paul certainly believed that these kinds of angelic forces existed, but perhaps in contrast to some of the Colossians who believed that Yeshua was just another one of them, not unlike wisdom. The hymn made the claim that they were all subordinate to the Messiah. In his paralleling letter, Paul taught that Yeshua is far above all rule, authority, power, dominion, and every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in that which is to come. Ephesians 1:21, World Messianic Bible, also Revelation 4:4. This would be a significant contrast between Yeshua the Messiah and the Jewish wisdom tradition. While wisdom may be an important feature of comparison in the Colossians 1:15-20 hymn, what is seen in this letter, in Moo's estimation, quote, does not depend exclusively on that tradition, and here, Christ's relations to creation, that all things have been created for him, goes beyond any Jewish tradition about wisdom, unquote. Wisdom was only an impersonal force designated by God to do important tasks, and was used by him in creating the universe. In stark contrast to wisdom, not only in Yeshua were all things created, but also di autu kai eis auton, through him and for him, New American Standard. Wisdom was used to create the universe on God's behalf. Yeshua created the universe in himself and for himself as a member of the Godhead and is supreme over all authority. Yeshua the Messiah is the creator. He exercises authority over the created forces of good and evil, which he has made, and he is the one who will determine the final judgment of those forces to which various Colossians had been making an appeal. There is no anticipation that wisdom will be responsible for the final judgment of all beings, as such judgment is given to Yeshua alone, Revelation 20, verse 11. Paul's usage of the hymn would admonish the Colossians to turn to Yeshua for their deliverance, being the physical representation of everything the Father in heaven is, demonstrated by his ministry on earth. Colossians 1:17. Yeshua's ultimate supremacy is seen in the hymn's declaration. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Colossians 1:17, New American Standard. This is where those holding to a low Christology believe that their case is sealed. Because as Sirach 1:4 says of wisdom, wisdom was created before all things. Revised Standard Version. Yeshua is before all things. and with the association seen in Colossians 1, 15 and 16 previously. It is thought Yeshua must be a created being, no different than wisdom. Wisdom 7:24 would add, for wisdom is more mobile than any motion. Because of her pureness, she pervades and penetrates all things. Revised Standard Version. Could this not be a power or ability granted to God's Messiah? If the Colossians had been influenced by any errors which denigrated who Yeshua the Messiah was to be for them, and Paul had never encountered them in person before, it is logical to assume how the apostle had to subvert the terms and descriptions used by the false teachers to lead them astray, overturning them. So, if the false teachers were claiming that Yeshua had just been a created intermediary force of God, a force like wisdom which scurries around the universe, Paul was going to use descriptions of wisdom and describe how Yeshua possessed those same qualities, but was also substantially different. In this case, the hymn says, Autos estin pro panton. He is before all things. New American Standard, or he exists before everything. Tree of Life Version, with the verb estin appearing in the present active indicative tense. Contrary to this, in Sirach 1:4, wisdom, protera panton ektistai, or it was created before all things. Revised Standard Version, with the verb ektistai appearing in the perfect passive indicative tense. Yeshua just is, but wisdom was made by an external force. As Mu indicates, quote, while these texts assert that wisdom was the first thing created, the claim in our verse is bolder. Christ existed before creation itself, unquote. This is far more than just some statement of high status. He was there before any of it came into existence. The message, is before all things, is a statement which affirms Yeshua's pre-existence. When the hymn claims that Yeshua the Messiah existed before all things, this before all, pra panton, relates to time. Yeshua himself said in John 8:58, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. New American Standard. And shortly after saying this, they picked up stones to throw at him. John 8:59, New American Standard. But not only did the hymn claim that Yeshua is before all things, it also said that in him all things hold together. Colossians 1:17, New American Standard. Ta panta and auto sunastaken. A definite connection with Hebrews 1:3 can be seen where Yeshua upholds all things by the word of his power. New American Standard. For an examiner such as O'Brien, this means that, quote, not only was the universe created in the Son as the sphere, by him as the divine agent, and for him as the goal, it was also established permanently in him alone. Notable to be considered is how this must be a continuous action, as seen by the perfect tense participle sunestemi. Without such action, as he indicates, quote, all would disintegrate, unquote. Such were never the claims made of wisdom. Wisdom works within the universe, whereas Yeshua actually runs and upholds the universe. As Mu is right to conclude, quote, what holds the universe together is not an idea or a virtue, but a person, the resurrected Christ. Without him, electrons would not continue to circle nuclei, gravity would cease to work, the planets would not stay in their orbits, unquote. Yeshua the Messiah is indeed the supreme creator. He is not just some agent within creation. Colossians 1:18. He is the source of the body, the assembly, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that in all things he might have the preeminence. From my Messianic Apologetics Revised Version adaptation. Colossians 1:18. A. Yeshua's role in creating and sustaining the universe has been described, Colossians 1:16 and 17, and as such, he is to be the most important one in the minds of those within the community of faith. Now the theme of the hymn shifts, as such significance will undoubtedly impact those who make up the congregation of the faithful. He is the head of the body, his community. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in all things. Colossians 1:18, Tree of Life version. Excuse me. The first title Yeshua is given is as head of the body, here a reference to the body of Messiah, the ecclesia. But while Yeshua has authority over both earthly and cosmic powers, Colossians 1:16, is Yeshua as he kaphale tu somatos an exclusive claim of authority, or is it one of Yeshua being the origin of his body? Speaking of the sphere of those affected by Yeshua, it might be best to consider how Paul communicated in Romans 12:4 and 5, for just as we have many members in one body, and all the members do not have the same function, so we who are many are one body of Messiah and individually members one of another. New American Standard. Yeshua as head would thus be the brain which directs the various parts in his body. Colossians 2:19. The Colossians were to be integrated into the supreme Yeshua and not the cosmic powers. Colossians 2:15, 18. This is an issue more affected by what is seen in the paralleling letter of Ephesians, as Yeshua is exalted as head over all things, Ephesians 1:22, New American Standard, but then later as head is depicted as the one from whom the whole body is being fitted and held together, Ephesians 4:15, New American Standard, as he is its origin. Likewise, per the debate over what Paul meant by the husband is the head of the wife, Ephesians 5:23, New American Standard, this is best understood in light of the controlling statement, be subject to one another in the fear of Messiah, Ephesians 5:21, New American Standard, and most significantly, husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies, Ephesians 5:28, New American Standard. These were statements which were radical for the first century in either a Hellenistic or a Jewish context, as they afforded considerable value to the woman, as the husband was to understand himself as her origin. The hymn of Colossians 1:15 through 20 and the head-body issue concerns more how the ecclesia functions by the power of its Lord, and head in Colossians 1:18 is joined together with the titular rank of firstborn. In the estimation of Ben Witherington III, quote, ideas of both authority and origin come together in this use of the word kaphale, because the origin of something was thought to be determinative for what came forth or followed from it, unquote. With this in mind, Yeshua as the head of the assembly, believers are to look to him to be their preeminent example of how to live, with his thoughts flowing down to the diverse parts of his body. When one understands Yeshua as the head / origin / source of his body, while some important claims are made about the Lord's power and authority, one need not overlook the special relationship he has to his followers. Yeshua, as head of his body, directs his divine thoughts down to the actions of his followers. A comparison between God as creator and the human being who desires to follow him, as seen in Psalm 19, may be considered. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other end. Nothing is hidden from its heat. The Torah of Adonai is perfect, restoring the soul. The testimony of Adonai is trustworthy, making the simple wise. The precepts of Adonai are right, giving joy to the heart. The mitzvot, commandments of Adonai, are pure, giving light to the eyes. The fear of Adonai is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of Adonai are true and altogether righteous. They are more desirable than gold, yes, more than much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them your servant is warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Who can discern his errors? Cleanse me of hidden faults. Also keep your servant from willful sins. May they not have dominion over me. Then I will be blameless, free from great transgression. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, Adonai, my rock and my redeemer. Psalm 19, 7 through 15, Tree of Life version. Psalm 118b. Similar to what has been previously described, Colossians 1:15, Yeshua the Messiah is once again labeled firstborn, but here the firstborn from the dead. Colossians 1:18b, New American Standard. Prototokos ek ton nekron. Yeshua being considered firstborn means that he possesses a very high and preeminent status, as previously described. Colossians 1:17 to 18a. This is seen in Revelation 1:5, where Yeshua is the firstborn of the dead and the ruler of the kings of the earth. New American Standard. In 1 Corinthians 15:20, Yeshua is called the first fruits of those who are asleep. New American Standard. Not only an emphasis on his completed work, but that his resurrection assures the redeemed how there will be a resurrection in the future for all. Daniel 12:2 and 3. Following his resurrection, Yeshua was exalted to the Father's right hand. Philippians 2:9, and it is from there we await his return with all his saints. 1 Thessalonians 3:13, New American Standard, who have died in faith. Okay, in our last set of verses, I realize the study is long, but it's important, as I'm sure many of you have been able to pick up a lot of points. Colossians 1:19 and 20, for in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, having made peace through the blood of his wooden scaffold, whether things upon the earth or things in heaven. From my Messianic Apologetics Revised Version, modifying the World Messianic Bible. Okay. Colossians 1:19. The hymn which Paul was quoting from makes a very significant claim about Yeshua the Messiah. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him. Colossians 1:19, New International Version. The clause, en alto, eudakesin pan ta pleroma, is actually rendered by Young's literal translation as, in him it did please all the fullness to tabernacle. Pleroma here communicates the totality of God with all his powers. Colossians 2:9, or what the New English Bible calls the complete being of God. The Septuagint employs cognates of pleroma to depict the Father in all his power and glory. So here we see a number of references. And they cried out one to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Sabaoth. The whole earth is full, the adjective pleres, of his glory. Isaiah 6:3, New English translation of the Septuagint. If someone shall be hidden in secret places, is it not that I also shall see him? Do I not fill, the verb plerao, the sky and the earth, says the Lord. Jeremiah 23:24, New English translation of the Septuagint. And he brought me in by the way of the gate to the north, opposite the house, and I looked, and behold, the house of the Lord was full, the adjective pleres, of glory, and I fell upon my face. Ezekiel 44:4, New English translation of the Septuagint. And blessed be the name of his glory forever, even forever and ever, and the whole earth will be filled, the verb plerao, with his glory. May it be, may it be. Psalm 72:19, New English translation of the Septuagint. It has been noted how these descriptions of God from the Tanakh or Old Testament bring out his personal involvement with the world or creation. Yeshua the Messiah was not just some force or even just a supernatural agent sent by God. Yeshua is not a place like the temple, which was filled with God's presence, even though temple language may be used to describe the Messiah from time to time. As a person, the Messiah is not the temple. Yeshua is rather God the Son, possessing all of his Father's attributes, incarnated in the world of mortals. Dunn actually concurs how, quote, the wholeness of God's interaction with the universe is summed up in Christ. Here, the thought reaches well beyond that of wisdom or even God dwelling in a good and compassionate person, unquote. Yeshua the Messiah is to be the only one where all people look for fullness. The hymn depicts how the Father actually expressed delight in the incarnation of his Son. John 1:14, also Luke 3:22. This is similar to how the Lord was pleased to dwell on Mount Zion. Psalm 67:17, or demonstrate his good pleasure. Psalm 44:3, 147:11, 149:4. Yet, in contrast to God's presence being manifest in a place on earth, Yeshua the Messiah is an actual person who would bring redemption not only to humanity, but all creation. Via the incarnation, Yeshua was later specified by Paul to be the one in whom all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. Colossians 2:9, New American Standard. Wright makes the critical point. The full divinity of the man Jesus is stated without any implication that there are two gods. It is the one God in all his fullness who dwells in him, unquote. Yeshua was not just one of many mediatorial beings or entities between humanity and God. He is God dwelling as a human among sinful humans to redeem humans from their transgressions. This goes beyond God's presence manifest in his temple or upon Mount Zion. Bowman and Kamazuski excellently summarize, quote, what Paul says about Christ is that all the fullness of what constitutes God dwells bodily in Christ. The presence and nature of God is totally or wholly, meaning all or whole, found in Christ. It is fullness found in Christ. It is found in him personally, in him, and it is found in him bodily. It is difficult to imagine a more forceful, emphatic affirmation that Jesus Christ literally embodies God's very being, unquote. From their book, Putting Jesus in His Place. The very reason why Paul would use pleroma language in praising God for his Son, other than for various connections seen in the Septuagint, may have been to immediately discount what the false teachers in Colossae were promoting. The fullness of everything which the Father is can only be found in Yeshua the Messiah, and not in whatever mediatorial beings or angels the Colossians were considering. Mu actually indicates how, quote, since the Gnostics used fullness language quite a lot, it has been suggested that this phrase betrays the fact that the original hymn was in praise of a Gnostic Redeemer figure. A more plausible variation of this thesis suggests that the hymn may have picked up the language from the Colossian false teachers and turned it against them, unquote. If this were the case, then the hymn of Colossians 1:15 through 20 simply provided Paul with the ammunition he needed to discredit the false teachers, and one should easily disregard the proposal that the hymn itself was proto-Gnostic in origin. What the Colossians were looking for could only be found in Yeshua as the fullness or pleroma of God involves something which no other supernatural mediatorial agent could be said to have done. Okay, and our final verse. I know, this has been long. Colossians 1:20. The uniqueness of Yeshua the Messiah is that through him, God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. Colossians 1:20, New Revised Standard. Yeshua is the one who provides final redemption, and not only to individual people, but ultimately to all creation. This does not at all speak of a universal salvation for all people, with sinners not consigned to eternal punishment, Matthew 25:46, but rather establishes the principle that all people can be redeemed to communion with the Father via Yeshua's atoning sacrifice. Within the rubric of how God will be all in all, 1 Corinthians 15:28 is how even though unredeemed, things under the earth, Philippians 2:10, will bow their knees and recognize Yeshua as Lord, Isaiah 45:23. Via the work of Yeshua, one day, things will be set right in the universe, Romans 8:19-22. Coming to the end of the Colossians 1:15-20 hymn, the fascinating description it offers of Yeshua the Messiah and the likely subversion of ideas which had errantly influenced the Colossians, Hurtado summarizes how, quote, drawing upon a traditional vocabulary of devotion to Jesus, the author of Colossians 1:15-20 produced a fresh and memorable declaration of Christ's glorious status. Those who first heard this celebration of Jesus probably recognized basically familiar convictions expressed freshly and eloquently, unquote. From his book, Lord Jesus Christ, Devotion to Jesus and Earliest Christianity. While some of the descriptions seen of Yeshua in Colossians 1:15-20 might not be those which people today would immediately use regarding him, they held some key importance in relation to halting the influence of the false teaching in Colossae. Yeshua was far more than just some agent or force of God, such as wisdom. He is the one in whom and for whom all of creation must give an account. In the larger discussion surrounding the nature of Yeshua and Christology, it should be obvious that Colossians 1:15-20 is not the only passage which informs contemporary believers about who the Messiah is, and as such, Colossians 1:15-20 should not be read isolated. And that concludes our theology roundup for today. And yeah, we had a very lengthy examination, Colossians 1:15-20. I hope that a number of the points made registered with you and that a number of things were hopefully clarified. All right, so let me switch windows back. Yes, there we go. And once again, to remind you, this study was taken from our ministry commentary, Colossians and Philemon for the Practical Messianic, available in both paperback as well as ebook for Amazon Kindle. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup for today. Now let's shift over to some news in the news roundup. And just to remind everyone, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because, of course, the news is time sensitive and changes from day to day. And we have some useful stories we need to go through. Before we get started on this, all of the news stories I'm about to go through will be listed for you to look through when this episode is archived later today at MessianicApologetics.net. So you can go watch the different clips, read the different articles, etc. And of course, we are definitely reminded of something very important we need to be doing. Number one, we need to be praying for peace in Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. Number two, we need to be praying for peace, Ukraine, Russia. Number three, we need to be praying for some of the situations which are hitting the American home front, especially as we approach the fall high holidays. Things are getting very complicated, very interesting, whether the end times are on our doorstep or a little further out. There are things happening which are going to affect some major changes in Western society, and we need not be ignorant of them. Okay, our first story. This came across my Instagram feed the 28th of August from oneforisrael.org, Theodore Herzl's Christian mentor. Theodore Herzl was a man with a plan, but what many people don't know is that he had an advocate and a mentor who was a committed Christian. Herzl may be the face of modern Zionism, but William Heckler is an unsung hero who also played an important role in helping to recreate the Jewish homeland. Now, why did I pass this along to you? Because one of the major narratives of Christian nationalism, replacement theology now, is that Christian Zionism and support for the state of Israel was caused what? It was caused by the Scofield Reference Bible and dispensationalism. There would have never been a Christian Zionism if it hadn't been for dispensationalism and Scofield, John Nelson Darby, the Bible, funded, in fact, by the Rothschilds. These are some of the things you see promoted by Christian nationalists. It was first promoted in mass over a year ago by Tucker Carlson when he interviewed John Rich. But something like this. So Theodore Herzl had this Christian mentor, William Heckler. Who was he? This at least demonstrates things are not as clear-cut or as simple as some may want you to think. And was William Heckler a dispensationalist? There were many movements of Protestant Christians long before John Nelson Darby, C.I. Scofield, and others showed up on the scene who believed that in the end times, the Jewish people would be gathered back to their homeland and there would be the rebirth of a Jewish nation state. So this is important to keep in mind as things are getting more and more complicated, and that alternative right narrative that there were no Christian Zionists, in fact, no Zionists until dispensationalism came on the scene. That is simply not true. Okay, our next story. This is from Instagram. Okay, our next story, and this is from Instagram, forwarded on. Jewish passengers shocked as Iberia Airlines serves kosher meals with free Palestine note. Travelers aboard Iberia flight IB 0102 traveling from Buenos Aires to Madrid were stunned to discover handwritten free Palestine notes on their kosher meals. This event, occurring on August the 5th, has ignited anger within the worldwide Jewish community. Indeed, why can't people just get their meals and eat them in peace? You know, even people who believe that what the state of Israel is doing right now in Gaza isn't very good, they recognize, don't compound this and make every single Jewish person be responsible. So even people on the left who they want Israel to stop their activities immediately recognize, don't go after every single Jewish person. That is wrong. But unfortunately, we live in a very unfair world where these kinds of things can and do happen. And it's sad, and we need to take note of them when they appear. Okay, our next story, and this came across my Instagram feed yesterday. The percentage of U.S. adults identifying as trans. There is nothing natural about this. And here you see trans identification begin to spike, begin to increase in the early 1990s. And it, of course, goes way up in the past 20 years from 2002, 2004. So here we see. And, of course, there are going to be a lot of people who, whether they're on the right or on the left, who wonder what is going on here. And yes, you know, there are a lot of people who they get exposed to certain ideologies, they get exposed to certain things. They want to go and experiment. I remember when I was in high school, McKinney High School, 1997, 1998. And of course, what hit the news scene? It was Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And then all of a sudden, people I knew were experimenting. And I even ran into some of that at my movie theater job, having to do theater checks. So yeah, people hear about these certain activities, they hear about these certain lifestyles, they're going to go experiment with it. That is a fact. Now, whether there are other factors in contributing to this rise of those identifying as transsexual, we'll just continue to wait and see. But this does make the job of clergy, religious leaders, much more complicated than ever before. Okay, here is something which came across, I'm sure it came across some of your feeds as well. I'm posting this from their YouTube channel. Okay. Yeah, this is from the Gateway Center for Israel. A Messianic rabbi and the Pope, from division to dialogue, with Marty Waldman and Nick Lesmeister. Okay, and this is about a 40-minute video, and you all can watch this yourself. But in the past, I have said that in 1998, there was a group of Messianic Jews who met at the Vatican with Joseph Ratzinger, who later, of course, became Pope Benedict XVI, who died at the beginning of 2023, end of 2022. Anyway, he's been deceased now for a number of years. And then, of course, later Pope Francis died this past year. And of course, many people have over the years reacted to different Messianic Jewish groups, leaders, theologians, having dialogue with Roman Catholicism. This is not hearsay. This is not innuendo. There's a long video you can watch about this with Marty Waldman, Baruch Hashem, right here in our backyard, Dallas, Texas. So whether you agree or disagree or fiercely disagree with this 1998 meeting, different Messianic Jews, Joseph Ratzinger, the Vatican, has affected the development of the Messianic Jewish movement. Many people are not aware of this. And I would say this has affected the development of the Messianic Jewish movement theologically, spiritually, even sociologically. In the same way, if you go all the way back to 1979, many of you are not aware of this either, even though I have spoken about it. I have referenced books which detail it. 1979, the break-off of the UMJC, Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations, from the MJAA, Messianic Jewish Alliance of America. That continues to affect us. So I'm referencing this video as a matter of history. You draw your own opinions. You can probably deduce my own opinion and what I think about it. Okay, our next news story, going to the Russia-Ukraine war. Open source intel from German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. This is yesterday, August the 28th. It seems clear that there will be no meeting between Putin and Zelensky. 2 weeks ago, we were optimistic. Donald Trump met in Alaska with Vladimir Putin. And then a few days later, on Monday at the White House with President Zelensky and different European and NATO leaders. Now, we know, as the expression goes, the fat lady has not sung, but after 2 weeks or so of waiting, I think everyone's optimism has evaporated. And the fact that, yes, we need to see the killing stopped, Ukrainians, Russians, but the fact that the Russian government, in its war of attrition against Ukraine, whatever its claims are, has been targeting Ukrainian civilians, this doesn't help Russia's case at all. Okay, also from open source intel yesterday, August the 28th, White House on Russian-Ukraine war. Putin and Zelensky are not ready to end this war themselves. Trump will make some additional statements on this later. So we know that the White House, the Trump administration, which wants to see an end to this conflict, sooner or later, they're going to have to make some kind of a move. Because is this going to be something which just goes on and on and on, this war of attrition where a generation of Ukrainians and Russians die off? I think that's terrible. At the same time, we're dealing with the world's #1 nuclear power. Whatever NATO, the West have done, Russia has been pushed into the Eastern Chinese sphere of influence. So yeah, what's going to happen? This is seemingly an impossible peace. That's why a lot of people, whether you like it or not, have speculated, well, whoever can bring peace to Russia and Ukraine, whoever can bring peace to Israel, Gaza, the Palestinian question, maybe he's the beast. Maybe he's the anti-Messiah, the Antichrist. You know, I don't blame people making that kind of speculation, that kind of guessing. From Breitbart yesterday, exclusive Netanyahu. This is Netanyahu's opinion. You can't be MAGA if you're anti-Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Breitbart News on Wednesday in an exclusive interview that the anti-Semitism that has grown on the political right is not only anti-Israel, but anti-American and anti-Trump. Netanyahu addressed the problem he referred to as the woke right, which arose as some conservative pundits, including a few who had once been supportive of Israel, opposed Israel in the 12-day war against Iran, as well as any American involvement on Israel's side. Yes, this is something we have to take note of. It's going to affect the American political, excuse me, the American political spectrum, and it's going to affect what we see in the coming years, decade, evangelical Protestantism, whether or not dispensationalism has a theological future, and most especially it's going to affect our own Messianic community. And not enough Messianic leaders and teachers, as to my knowledge, of course I may be wrong, are paying attention to this. And that is not good. Okay, from Instagram, this came across my feed. This is from August the 27th. Okay, so if you ever encountered the channel The Rift, this is Elijah Schaefer, and he recently had Joel Webbin on, and here Joel Webbin is responding to a video of Greg Locke. Christian Zionist pastor Greg Locke pushes Israel and Netanyahu to blow up the Gaza Strip to build the third temple and usher in the Antichrist. And here you see Greg Locke, who is not my favorite person. He's out there supporting Israel, you know, okay, but with Israeli flags, and he is wearing a talit, a Jewish prayer shawl, even though I believe theologically he believes that the Torah, the law of Moses, has been abolished. So in my opinion, you got two embarrassments. You've got Greg Locke making a mockery of things like the talit. He's definitely going to pull some of the I'll bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. But then, you know, Israel needs to blow up the Dome of the Rock and set up the third temple. A lot of religious Jews say, no, that's not how it works. And then you got Joel Webbin, replacement theology, church is the new Israel, Jews need to self-deport from his version of America, responding to this. I mean, if you see some of this and you say to yourself, what in the hell is going on? You would not be alone. But this shows you that things are getting more and more complicated. And we can't just sit in a bubble, in a vacuum, acting like this doesn't affect us. You know, a lot of people are going to see in the coming years, because of things like this, you've got an extremist in a Greg Locke actually puts on a talit in a very disrespectful way. And I'm not here to get in, can non-Jewish believers wear talit, wear seeds or not? That's not what we're talking about here. He's a charismatic preacher. He's using the talit as though it's some kind of a gimmick. Very offensive to religious Jews. waving Israeli flags, and he's making the inflammatory remark that the state of Israel needs to eventually just bomb the Dome of the Rock and rebuild the third temple. Yet, the fact that the state of Israel has never done that, going back to the 1967 war, demonstrates that Israel is a tolerant state when it comes to other religions. It knows that that is the kind of action which would inaugurate World War III. And if the religious Jews want a piece of the Temple Mount, it's going to have to be something negotiated, and it's going to have to be something done within this idea of tolerance and understanding of the three Abrahamic religions. So a third temple is going to have to be placed right alongside the Dome of the Rock. I'm just telling you, that's going to be how it has to happen. All right, so we're going to change gears entirely now to a little bit of my childhood. This came across my news feed, Instagram. Very, very sad. Gary Burbank passed away. Some of you all know who Gary Burbank was if you're from the greater Cincinnati area or you ever listened to 700 WLW. That's a huge, radio station in the greater Cincinnati area. And I remember when I'd be visiting my relatives in Nashville, Tennessee, late at night, WLW would actually turn up their radio frequency intensity, and you could get it in Nashville. And so Uncle Mike, who also passed away this past year, late at night, would always listen to the Cincinnati Reds. But Gary Burbank, a longtime 700 WLW AM personality and nationally syndicated radio host, died at the age of 84. And yeah, this was just really, really sad. And one of the things I remember growing up is Gary Burbank had, in the greater Cincinnati, northern Kentucky area, he had a chain of barbecue restaurants, Burbank's Barbecue. And this is, of course, when we were at Christ United Methodist. It's back in our church days. But my father, our family, we loved going to Burbank's Barbecue. Oh, we loved it. It had like all the complimentary cornbread you could eat. And yes, all of us would get the pulled pork, although, once in a while I'd get like the multi-meat platter. And this is when I was, 10, 11 years old. But we just used to love going to Burbank's Barbecue. And it's when I got some of my first, taste test of, different styles of barbecue. Like they had the 3 different sauces. They had a sweet sauce. They had a vinegar sauce, and then they had a hot sauce. And I would always, mix them up together. And and I'll stop with this, the one thing which I just consider, if you're a barbecue person, is a great sin if you go to a barbecue restaurant. If you choose to get fries as your side, why would you put ketchup on your fries at a barbecue restaurant when you've got barbecue sauce and you can test them out? So, yeah, I just have great memories from Burbank's Barbecue. And later, sadly, it closed. It didn't do too well. Those are restaurants for you. But yeah, with all the stuff that we have to deal with, growing anti-Semitism, growing anti-Judaism, Russia, Ukraine, I miss that time period of my life. I miss the 1980s and 1990s. And I know many of you do as well. Okay, from Open Source Intel Defender, and this is from yesterday afternoon, August the 28th. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has stated that there will be no meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin following last night's missile and drone attack against Kiev, which resulted in at least 21 deaths and over 100 injuries, as well as damage to the British Council Office and European Union mission. Yes, I don't know what is going through Vladimir Putin's mind. I mean, this is something which needs to stop. And he is targeting civilian areas. He's not targeting military, industry, that sort of thing. From Open Source Intel, the global Samud flotilla announced plans to send 50 vessels toward Gaza on August the 31st in an attempt to challenge Israel's naval blockade. Sounds dangerous. Not sure how the IDF plans to respond. Okay, and this is the one which we believe that Greta Thunberg will be a part of. August the 31st. That's less than 2 days away. What's going to happen? We'll see what takes place over the weekend. Okay, we've got 3 more stories. This is from today, August the 29th, open source intel. Turkish foreign minister. We have decided to cut off all economic and trade relations with Israel and closed our skies to its planes. Okay. That's Turkey. And of course, Turkey is a member of NATO. So things are definitely changing. From Instagram, okay, this is from the New York Post today, August the 29th. Breaking, President Trump has revoked the Secret Service detail of former Vice President Kamala Harris, which had been extended by former President Joe Biden for an additional year before he left office. Originally said to expire on July the 21st, the detail will now end on September the 1st, following Trump's order signed on Thursday. Okay, and the question is, of course, with all these matters of Russiagate, Epstein, even a little bit of election 2020, how does this play into that? So we'll see, of course, what happens in the coming weeks and September, October. And then our last story, okay, open source intel, but this has been circulating. This is from today, August the 29th. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, will be denied entry to the United States for the UN General Assembly, even as multiple nations prepare to formally recognize a Palestinian state. And the observation here is unbelievable. Okay, so we do live in interesting times, and we've got the fall high holidays coming up, and we have the news roundup. Why? So we can stay calm, we can stay grounded, and yes, while we can anticipate some dramatic things up ahead, we can also trace the narrative of how they probably came to pass, rather than just be shocked and not be able to offer some degree of reason, solace, and sanity to those who don't quite know what to do. Because one of the worst things you can do right now is not pay attention to what is happening in the world, not pay attention to what's going on in the realm of religion. You need to be up to speed, because those who pay attention to the signs of the times, whether it's the end is at hand or it's a little further out, those who pay attention are to offer words of wisdom and words of help to those who need it. And indeed, I don't always know who in the Messianic sphere of influence is able to do that, but we're going to do the best we can. All right, so we had a very lengthy teaching today, Colossians 1:15 through 20. I hope you all learned some things which were useful to go back and dig into Colossians more. And we also have some news events which we're waiting to just see develop over the next few days, especially as we look toward the fall high holidays. This weekend, the next few days are a rather difficult time for my family. Tomorrow, we will be commemorating the Yahrzeit. That is the death anniversary of my grandmother, Mary Ruth Jeffries, who passed away 6 years ago. She was a real anchor in our family. And after her passing, things have definitely changed in our extended family, especially 2020, 2021, the lockdowns, everything. Don't want to get too much into that. Also, on Monday, we'll be commemorating the 33rd anniversary of my father, John McKee's death. And I'll probably put out a reflection on Sunday about that, and how, as his firstborn son and as the one who continues the family line or not, being involved in the Messianic community, reflecting on his legacy and his impact, how that has all affected me. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and donations toward all of our ministry efforts. I encourage you, if you have not already, please go to our website, MessianicApologetics.net. There you can access a number of free articles, frequently asked questions entries. Back issues of Outreach Israel News are listed. Also, back episodes, Messianic Insider, the Key Moment Shorts. You can take a look at a lot of the things we've been doing. We'll see you again on Monday with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, Shabbat Shalom, and take care.